Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing was one of the big things that actually brought me back in. It's like, oh, this is interesting. This is a whole nother take as to what you can do in comics. And so, and whether it was because he's British or not, I don't know. It's just something, you know, there was the fact that he was coming at it from a different angle. I mean, I could also say the same thing about, you know, Walt Simonson with Thor, or Frank Miller on Daredevil at that time. For me, it was like, some of those things were like, these are different ways of looking at comics. Because I was starting to feel like, you know, all right, I've been reading superhero comics for many, many years. Let's see. You know, I was starting to lose interest in the typical superhero comic. And then they had a few of these, you know, visionary guys that were really looking at it in a different way. And yes, I mean, I think it was in the late 80s, after Alan Moore was discovered, you know, that then they actively started seeking British writers, and that's when you got a bunch of new blood in that would really they were just thinking of it because they didn't grow up on American superhero comics the same way. And so, because they came from a different viewpoint that way, that's why you were getting some of these just like different takes. And it's like, I don't want to say it's like, it's not like they didn't love American comics, they have a different understanding of them kind of thing. And I think that's part of what made it an interesting mix kind of thing. I don't know if anybody else has opinions on that.
Oh, something I remember roughly from that time was a Huntress series. It was it was written by Joey Cavalieri, and it was drawn by you, Joe. And your art looked much different on that than it did anywhere else. Like, that was not E-Man art. That was much different. Did you use some technique that made it, I mean, it was sort of like a horror series at times, and your art seemed adapted to it being a horror series.
That was intentional, and part of it was technical. I used something called Craft Tent board so that I could have a couple of different layers of shading and texture. So that had a lot to do with it, but a lot of it was just Joey. It was also a different take on superheroes. I don't know if people really paid attention, but the origin story of Huntress is a molested child. And we go into a lot of the problems of the family. And it was a kind of a dark story. So yeah, I was trying to adapt the art to what Joey was doing, and Joey was also working into various levels of the city as a character, different personalities. Joey was talk about the bridge and the toggle, so we wouldn't get into all that. So it was a different take on what we were doing, and I tried to match that. I want to put a plug in for something else that came around that time. I really got into doing that textured, the Craft Tent board, and I did with Andy Hilfer a three-part series with the novelist Jerome Charon called Family Man, which we're just now putting out as a collection in hardback. And it was pushing that style art a little farther what we did than what we did in the Huntress. So it gets pretty dark, pretty complicated. So I'm very pleased with what Joey and I did. And this is another character, Helena Bertinelli. Who would expect her to be around after all this time? So yeah, I'm very pleased with what we did there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Family Man, because and I'm glad that that's coming back. It's through what It's Alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was originally was it a Paradox Press?
It was Paradox.
So that you had another imprint that DC was working out of at the time.
Yeah, and the
Road to Perdition, yeah.
Right, Road to Perdition, that movie is based on a series that came through the Paradox line, because DC wouldn't always back the experimental approaches of some of their editors, but they gave them room to try it. And Andy Helford, and Andy's a weird guy, but he's a good guy, and he had lots of ideas. Andy was one of the first guys who was bringing stuff in from Japan. Remember the little Gon, the little dinosaur guy. Samurai warriors. That, Andy was doing all this stuff, and he was letting us try these kind of experimental things in the Paradox line. So there was room to be trying lots of different things there. But it didn't always work. It wasn't always supported with the kind of advertising it needed or anything. But there was a room to try it. And, sometimes things did work out well.
Yeah, didn't History of Violence came out in
History of
Paradox too, so
Violence
those,
also.
that and Road to Perdition are two of those things movies that, they're comic book movies, right, that nobody realizes that see them, that they came from comic books. Other questions?
This is kind of a little widescreen question. Because it always felt like with the 90s that DC was basically replacing pretty much every major character with another character from Death of Superman, which introduced the four Supermen.
Yeah, that was our fault.
to the
Tired
to
of
the
it.
Night Quest, then Green Lantern, then Green Arrow, Flash, Wonder Woman. Was there an overall thing with DC that they kind of wanted to replace everyone, or was it, like I said, again, because the 90s was a bunch of gimmicks, and then everybody was going to come back in a year or two?
See,
When I said it was kind of our fault, it kind of was. Because Death of Superman became this massive hit.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think when you say it was this some kind of plan, you're assuming that DC ever had a plan. Okay. None of us had plans. Okay, we were there to tell comic book stories. There was never any overarching plan. It was just, and I don't know if maybe that's what's going on in DC and Marvel today, is that they feel the need to have a plan. But I think the world's better off when you kind of don't have one. And you just kind of let stuff happen. Death of Superman, we took Superman away and replaced him with four other guys. This was something immediately picked up by the Batman people, the Green Lantern people. It just seemed to be the formula du jour. This seemed to be the thing that was working, is give people alternate versions of these characters. And eventually the originals come back.
Well, I wanted to add, see, the Death of Superman, I mentioned gimmick, but see, it was such a good story how they handled it. It was more like that sentimentality of, we can take characters you thought you didn't care about and show you, actually you do care about it. See, with Green Lantern, the Death of Superman directly related to why we were able to do what we did. If Mongol hadn't destroyed Coast City, that wouldn't have pushed Hal Jordan to want the Guardians to resurrect it, him getting turned down and then him wanting to become paralyzed. So the Death of Superman, it wasn't just, oh, let's try something like, no, it was like these, it was all interconnected. Now, it wasn't this grand plan from the beginning, no. But it's just the nature of these characters, how they're interconnected. It's like dominoes, like I mentioned earlier. It's like if you knock down one, it's going to affect us over here. Unfortunately, you had a great wealth of creators at the time that were able to take those fallen dominoes and do something with it.
Like the four replacement Superman, where it was a direct attempt to try and bring the original Superman back. It was not to replace him. It was more or less, we were playing off the whole idea of Elvis sightings. Okay, you know, but they were happening all at the same time in different places. And we had the 4 different titles. So it was a chance, we each had our own little sandbox to play with, to try and come up with a candidate to be the new Superman, who we knew full well would never be the new Superman. The original Superman was
But
always
you
going to come
each
back.
had to make a case for it.
But we got to play with the essence of what everybody thought Superman should be. Okay? Our Superboy, for instance, is less about being Superboy, but being the original Superman from back in Action Comics 1. The little snot-nosed whatever with more power than he knows what to do with. That was who he is. The character of John Henry Irons was about the essential nobility of the Superman character himself. You know, this bigger figure, this sort of thing. This was the kind of stuff we were playing. And I think when you're comic creators, you're simply just picking up the tools, the toys that you're left in front of you, and trying to play with them in a new way.
It's so interesting that those things were, you know, all these things you're saying are meant to be temporary, but yet, Daryl, you're doing Kyle Rayner for what, like, almost 90 issues did you draw in there? To like